The buzzards circled low over the rim of the canyon, wide-winged and slow, riding the thermals above a red hush of bloodied sand. What remained of the caravan was barely worth the name. Scattered wagons cracked open like old bones, wheels torn loose and burned, and men and mules alike rotting in the early summer heat. Gunpowder and spilled whiskey soaked the soil, and the only sound was the creak of wood and the shift of flies. He came from the south, leading a half-starved horse, boots caked in riverbed mud. His name was Elijah Vance, and he had the look of a man who'd outlived too many things, grief chief among them. A month ago, his wife Anna had coughed herself to death in their bed, bleeding into her pillow in the long hours before dawn. He'd buried her himself on the hill behind their failing ranch, wrapped in the linen she'd embroidered as a girl. Since then, Elijah had wandered. Not for work or for hope, but because standing still felt like being buried next to her. It was a scorched dog's bark of instinct that brought him up the canyon path, rifle cocked, senses stretching thin over the ruin. He expected corpses. He found one not quite dead. She was slumped beneath an overturned wagon axle, arm pinned, hair matted with dust and dark crusted blood. A girl, maybe 18 or so, with the posture of someone raised to believe pain ought to be borne silently. Her dress was once pale silk, now torn and blackened, and her shoes were of a make he'd never seen on this continent. Expensive, foreign, out of place among the freight train of gamblers, settlers, and hired guards now lying dead around her. Elijah dropped to a knee, easing the weight off her arm, checking her breathing. "You're all right," he muttered, lying like any decent man might. "You're gonna be all right." Her eyes fluttered open, one brown, the other clouded over, and she said something low in a language he couldn't place. French, no, something older, something stiff and northern. She blinked slowly, mouth working without sound. Then she passed out again. It took 2 hours to rig a stretcher and clear a path through the wreckage. He found her passport in the wreckage of a velvet-lined satchel. No name he could pronounce. Royal seals. 17 pages of signatures and permissions, all in a language he'd only seen in books, though one phrase stood out in English, stamped in red. To be delivered in protection to His Grace Leopold by order of the Crown. Leopold, Elijah spat. Some fool duke across the ocean. Not much help to her now. He got her back to his ranch on the third night, after riding hard beneath dry stars and sleeping none. The land was unforgiving, mule deer tracks, coyotes nosing closer by the hour, and no one left at the cabin but memory and wind. He cleaned her wounds in silence, boiled water, stitched the worst gashes with the last of his wife's thread. She didn't cry out, just watched him with that one dark eye, tracking his every move like a hawk. On the 5th day she spoke again. "Your wife," she said, voice coarse as pine bark. "She is gone." Elijah stilled, a spoonful of broth halfway to her lips. "She is." The girl nodded once. "Mine too." He didn't ask for clarification. She hadn't meant a spouse. He could see it in the way she said mine, as if something vital had been taken and only ashes left. She gave him her name on the 6th day. Ingrid, no surname, or else she decided not to share it. She wouldn't say where she was from, only that she had been traveling under guard toward San Francisco. Her English was formal, brittle. She did not weep, did not ask about the men who'd escorted her. When Elijah mentioned the massacre, she turned her face to the wall and went quiet for hours. He thought she would leave once she healed. Maybe she'd try to find a consulate or wire someone in the East, but she stayed. She helped in the garden, gathering what little would grow in the hard soil. She milked the goat, swept the porch, hung linens to dry with thin, practiced hands. There was something disciplined in her, as though routine were a thing she'd clung to while the world cracked. But at night, Elijah would sometimes find her out by the fence line, standing still as stone, lips moving faintly as though speaking to ghosts. One night he caught a name, Leopold, spoken like a curse. In the second week, riders came, not lawmen. 3 men, bearded and broad-shouldered, with the stench of desert sweat and easy violence. One wore a hat stitched with gold thread. They said they were looking for something lost. A girl, European, young, pale, a gift to a client overseas, paid for already. Elijah said he'd seen no such girl. They lingered, asked if his wife was around, grinning like dogs scenting blood. He lied cleanly, told them she'd died birthing a stillborn child 2 months past, told them he had no visitors, told them he'd shoot them in the back if they stepped past his gate again. That night, Ingrid slept with a knife under her pillow. She did not ask who the men were. He did not ask if she recognized them. 2 days later, Elijah found the girl in the barn, pulling back the hammer on his old revolver again and again until her hands bled from the recoil. She looked at him once, unspeaking, then kept practicing. She never once asked for permission. By the end of that month, there was a second grave on the hill. No name, no marker, just a small silver locket buried in the dirt, its chain snapped, its contents gone. Elijah asked nothing about it. Some things were better left under soil. But he had begun to understand a grim truth about the girl he'd saved. Ingrid had not merely survived the slaughter. She was sharpening herself into something meant to return to it. The winter came early that year, rolling down from the high Sierras with a vengeance. The wind tore the last leaves from the cottonwoods and made the eaves of the cabin moan like dying things. Snow laid thick by November's end, forcing Elijah to board the shutters and ration what little they had. Ingrid didn't complain, she never did. She moved through the cold like she had grown up with it, bare-fingered and quiet, her face unreadable beneath the thick woolen scarf Elijah gave her. It had belonged to Anna. She never said thank you, only folded it tight and wore it every day thereafter. They settled into a rhythm forged more of necessity than affection. Elijah chopped wood and checked the trap lines. Ingrid fed the goat, boiled snow, scraped hides. When storms buried the trail, she read books from Anna's shelf, mostly English romances or translated Russian histories, the ink already fading. She read them aloud sometimes in the evening, her voice low, measured, and strange, like she was translating as she went. Elijah would sit by the fire with his whittling, not listening, and yet never asking her to stop. She rarely spoke of the massacre. But one night, after the firewood burned low and the wind rose like wolves outside, she said, "There were 13 of them." He looked up from the chair. "The ones who attacked your caravan." She nodded once. "Bandits." She shook her head. "Men who serve money, not ideals, mercenaries, paid by someone with reach." "Why?" Her gaze drifted to the hearth. "Because I chose not to be married." Elijah didn't speak. After a long silence, she added, "To a man who wanted to be king." That was the most she ever gave him, but it was enough to cast shadows. Men like that didn't forget, and they didn't leave loose ends wandering foreign soil. Ingrid's body healed faster than her silence, but there was a hunger in her now, buried under the polite work of survival. She asked for maps, not of California but farther east, Kansas, Missouri, the trade routes, the rail hubs. She asked about telegraph lines, about places where one could vanish. By February, she began to ride. Elijah taught her with patience, saying little. She took to it fast. Her balance was strong, her eyes steady. She favored a blade over a gun, though she practiced both. At night, she pored over books in German and English, correcting her own grammar under her breath, repeating strange names to herself like spells. When Elijah asked her why she practiced so hard, she didn't answer. But in her silence, he heard the scream that must have rung through the canyon before she was pinned beneath a wagon axle. The kind of scream you bury, the kind that festers into resolve. In early spring, the riders returned. Different men, better armed, but bearing the same swagger. They came to the cabin with fake smiles and questions that slithered between the words. She might be traveling under the name Inga, or Ilsa, you'd remember her. Pale, blue eyes, real fine manners. Elijah told them the same thing he had the last time. There were no women here but graves. They pushed too far, One stepped through the threshold. Elijah shot him in the leg and broke the second man's nose with the butt of his rifle before dragging them both to the edge of the property and warning the third, the silent one with the scarred cheek, to ride back with a message. She's gone. You keep sniffing, you'll join her. They left, but Elijah knew it wouldn't be the last of them. He told Ingrid to run. She refused. They'll keep coming, he said. They won't stop until they get what they want. I know, she said, her voice flat. That's why I need to stop them first. She showed him the letter that night. Not the passport, he'd seen that already, but something hidden within the lining of her blood-stained travel cloak. A sealed missive written in 3 languages, Latin, French, and one that looked Scandinavian, with too many vowels and looping strokes. The wax was the color of wine. He couldn't read it, but she translated. By this bond, witnessed and ratified, the House of Ostergaard pledges Lady Ingrid of Oslav as betrothed to Leopold, Duke of Thornfelt, upon her 18th year. In return, 25,000 florins in safe harbor under the crown. Elijah frowned. You were bought. She nodded. My mother died before she could stop it. My father arranged it in the year of the famine. He thought it would save us. And did it. I'm the only one left. Elijah ran a hand through his beard, heavy with thought. If this man wants you so bad, there's more at stake than a marriage. Ingrid folded the letter again, her expression iron. He intends to crown himself with blood. He needs old blood to do it. Mine. In the months that followed, she changed. Not suddenly, but with the slow inevitability of frost reclaiming earth. She spoke less, watched more, listened to the wind like it might whisper the names of those coming for her. Together they built traps around the property, tripwires, early warnings, hidden pits. Elijah showed her how to rig a shotgun from string and pressure plates. Ingrid took to the work with frightening calm. One night he found her drawing something in the dust of the barn floor. A crest, not quite a crown, thorns coiled around a rose. What's that? He asked. The sigil of Thornfelt, his house. She dragged a line through it, slowly, deliberately. You want revenge, Elijah said. I want justice. He shook his head. They're not the same thing. Ingrid looked up at him then, and there was a fire behind her eyes that burned like something centuries old. They are where I come from. The next morning she asked if he still had a suit, a proper one. For what? He asked. Because you're coming with me. To where? To the city, she said. We have names to learn and debts to call. And just like that, the cabin became a memory. They left in April, beneath a sky split with gulls and wildflowers. Ingrid rode like she was chasing the horizon. Elijah rode beside her because he knew what loneliness could do to someone bent on a mission. She didn't need a guardian anymore. But she would need a witness. The city they rode into was Sacramento, though to Ingrid it might as well have been Babylon. Smoke-stained brick and rail steam, muddy boulevards thrumming with hooves and wheels, newspaper boys shouting scandal beside women in silks too thin for the chill. She moved through it with that same cold grace, unblinking, unreadable, utterly self-contained. A wolf in a borrowed dress. Elijah stayed close, not out of protection, but because she asked it. She needed a partner to walk unnoticed through the bureaucracies and backdoors of a city fat with secrets. Men underestimated him, a weather-beaten widower in threadbare boots, but Ingrid knew better. They began with the ledger houses, where names could be bought and erased for coin. She posed as his niece, Inga Vance, just in from the Utah territories. With Elijah at her side, the questions softened. She paid in gold sovereigns, taken from the wreckage of her old caravan, melted and recast into something untraceable. Within a week, they had access to shipping manifests, hotel registries, and the clerk files of the foreign consulate. Her instincts were surgical. She would spend an hour speaking to a librarian, then toss out 3 names over breakfast. These men have either seen me or seen the men who hunt me. Then they'd move fast and precise. No noise, no waste. They tracked a courier through the German trade office, followed him to a tavern on Fifth where bribes passed hand to hand beneath the table. Elijah watched the door while Ingrid leaned in and said one word, Ostergaard. The man's eyes widened. He ran. She let him. We don't want the fast ones, she said. We want the men who think they're too important to run. By the 3rd week, the storm she had courted began to show its teeth. Word filtered through the docks, men with foreign accents offering coin for a girl with one blind eye. A barmaid whispered that one of them had a tattoo of a crown on his wrist. Another had knives sewn into his coat sleeves. Elijah bought a second pistol. Ingrid stopped using her real name altogether. Then finally, a break. A banker, one of the small ones, the kind who handled estate parcels and shipping insurance, let it slip that a ship had arrived 3 days prior under high secrecy. The Hekla out of Copenhagen, bearing diplomatic crates and private security. He mentioned a duke, not openly, but enough. He's here, Ingrid said that night, standing in the rented room above the stable house. She had discarded her scarf. The white of her blind eye caught the lamp glow like pearl. He's come to see the body for himself. Elijah sat at the wash basin, hands idle in the water. And when he finds you're not dead. Her voice was a whisper. He won't. Not yet. Because she had a plan, and it began with becoming the ghost they thought her to be. She needed time, names, pressure points. Over the next few days, she gathered them. Count Nikolai Leberman, former military strategist, now serving as Thornfeldt's chief advisor, living in a suite downtown with 2 guards at the door and a girl on each arm. Inspector Hartigan, half-Irish customs officer, bought and paid for with foreign coin, saw the caravan's manifest, then scrubbed it clean. Father Wilkenson, Episcopal by way of Munich, the man who had blessed the marriage contract. Each man touched the fire, and Ingrid would make sure each one burned. The first to fall was Hartigan, not through violence but disgrace. Ingrid intercepted his mistress, a seamstress with a bitter mouth and a long memory. They fed her just enough to go to the papers. Within 3 days, Hartigan's name was on every corner sheet, tangled in words like fraud, bribery, and foreign interference. He vanished overnight. Some said he hung himself. Ingrid didn't blink. Next came Leberman. That one required steel. He liked the theater. They waited until intermission, then followed him to the alley where he lit his cigar in private. Elijah handled the lookout. Ingrid walked up calm, cloaked, asked for a light. By the time he realized who she was, she had a blade between his ribs. Not deep, just enough. She whispered something in his ear. Elijah never asked what. The Count lived, but he fled the city within a day, swearing he'd seen a ghost. That her eye had gone white because she'd seen heaven burn and wanted to bring the fire back. And then there was the priest. That one took time. Confessionals shadowed pews. Ingrid disguised herself as a girl newly engaged, desperate for absolution before marriage. She spun lies like silk, pulling names out of him with feigned sobs and wide, guilty eyes. What she learned chilled even Elijah. Leopold had not come just to recover her. He had come to finalize the narrative. Ingrid Ostergaard, lost in the American West, tragically killed by bandits en route to her betrothed, her body unrecoverable, but her lineage absorbed, her name honored posthumously. She was to be erased, even as he wore her bloodline like a crown. Ingrid did not cry. She did not rage. She simply nodded, as if some puzzle piece had finally clicked into place. The night they confronted Wilkenson, it wasn't in a chapel. It was in a warehouse on the edge of the rail line, where shipments bound for Europe were stamped and sealed. They found him kneeling, not praying, counting coin, the good silver marked with the crown of Denmark. He looked up, saw Elijah, then saw her. He said one word, "You." She said nothing at all. He tried to run, didn't get far. They left him alive, bruised, broken, his tongue half bitten from fear. But before they did, Ingrid took something from him. A signet, gold, etched with the seal of Thornfelt. It was proof, and it was bait. That night she made Elijah swear to help her with the next step, the final step. She would fake her death again. Not as a lost girl, but as a murdered woman. They would plant the story themselves, leak it through back channels, stage a final confrontation in the dark. A burned dress, a forged body, blood on borrowed silk. And when Leopold believed it, when he exhaled at last, she would be standing behind him. "Are you sure?" Elijah asked her, watching her press the ring into wax, sealing the final letter she would ever send in her old name. Her voice was low, distant. "He wants to take my ghost back with him. I think I'll let him." She turned away from the light. Behind her, the city smoldered with secrets. In the hills outside Oakland, where eucalyptus trees leaned like old sentries and fog moved thick as wool, Ingrid built the scene of her death. It took 3 weeks. Elijah handled the logistics, purchasing a body from a potter's field under an alias, forging the documents that would tie the girl's name to Ingrid's false trail. He hated every step of it, but he did it because she asked, and because the fire in her hadn't dimmed. It had only focused. She didn't move like someone running anymore. She moved like someone setting the trapdoor under another's feet. They clothed the corpse in Ingrid's dress, the one she'd worn when he first found her beneath that wagon axle, and left it face down in a ravine east of the Summit Road, where rains had eaten the soil into soft cliffs and time moved slowly. Ingrid handled the face, burning it just enough. She cracked her own mirror for ashes, scattered horsehair for false trace, smeared blood from her arm into the dirt like a final cry for help. The rumor went out 2 days later. Young woman, foreign-born, possibly of noble descent, found dead in suspected robbery gone wrong. Remains unrecognizable. Personal effects traced to name, Ingrid Ostergaard. Elijah took no pleasure watching the story travel. It slithered through the wires fast, as all tragedy did. A girl born to marry power, devoured by a country too wild to hold her. By week's end, it had reached the East Coast. By 10 days, it reached Europe. The trap was set. Ingrid disappeared, fully this time. New name, new clothes, her hair dyed darker, chopped shorter. She let the blind eye show now, bold and unhidden. Elijah still called her Ingrid in private, but she answered to Etta when they stepped outside. A cousin, they said, visiting from Illinois. She did not hide idly. She studied, read the dispatches in foreign tongues, drew floor plans from memory of Thornfelt's manors and palaces. She had grown up behind gates, she said, and understood the patterns of the powerful, how they moved, how they fed, how they lied. Then came the news, a private wake being held in San Francisco under the name of a visiting European dignitary. A man whose name was never printed, but whose coat of arms carried a thorned crown. Leopold had come. Not to recover, to grieve, publicly, to be seen mourning the bride he'd never wed, speaking in florid terms of sorrow and tragedy, the performance of a man cloaked in loss but inching closer to legitimacy. Ingrid booked her room the same day. The wake would be held at the Marrow estate, a sprawling stone manor outside the Presidio. Elijah secured them access through an undertaker's contact, 2 staff members meant to serve and clean unnoticed. Ingrid wore plain black like the rest of the hired help. She moved through the house like a whisper, face lowered, but eyes alert. The night of the wake, the city below hummed with foghorns and gaslight. Guests arrived in velvet and fur, high collars and clinking jewelry, their words thick with foreign lilt. Elijah took his post in the back hall, pretending to pour wine, watching the guard rotation and the hallways that led to the study. Ingrid slipped away just after 11. She found him near the fire. Leopold. He was older now, broader, but the eyes were the same. Cold, pale, the kind that measured everything and pitied nothing. He spoke in French to a woman beside him, smiling faintly, hands wrapped around a glass of brandy like a man who already owned the evening. Ingrid didn't reveal herself, not yet. She waited, listening. He spoke of sacrifice, of fate, of bloodlines too noble to be wasted. She heard him say her name, Ingrid, like it belonged to him. When she stepped into the room, he didn't look up at first. Then he did. He didn't recognize her, not until she spoke. "You wear sorrow well," she said in perfect Danish. Leopold turned white. The woman beside him gasped, then stood. But Ingrid had drawn her knife already, not raised, just shown. "You're dead," Leopold said. "No," she said, "you just buried the wrong girl." Elijah was already in motion, blocking the hallway behind. The guards outside the study door were unconscious, chloroform in a little time, nothing fatal. Ingrid stepped closer. "You hired men to slaughter innocent people. You burned them because I said no. It was your duty to say yes. And it is my right," she said, "to answer in kind." Leopold tried to speak again, but she was faster. "She didn't kill him. Not outright." She handed him a copy of the missive, her betrothal contract, torn, blood-marked, and signed in her own hand with a single word scrawled across the bottom. "Revoked." Then she turned to the others, his advisor, the priest who'd followed him across the sea, the diplomat who'd forged the shipping orders. "I was a gift," she said, "a dowry with a heartbeat. You thought that made me yours." She placed the forged death certificate on the table, beside his untouched drink. "It doesn't." They left him alive, disgraced, because death would only make him a martyr. Humiliation, Ingrid said, lasts longer. By morning, Leopold had fled, back to Europe, chased not by force but by rumor, a man too weak to contain his bride, a duke shamed by a girl he thought lost. The title of king would never come now. The crown would pass to another line. Ingrid vanished again, but this time she did not run. She and Elijah headed east, quiet and slow, stopping only in towns where her name meant nothing and the ground felt new. They built nothing at first, just road, carried by the strange peace of a long war ended. One night in Montana, they found a plot of land choked with pine and silence. No neighbors, no past. She said, "Here." Elijah didn't question it. And when the cabin rose, it was not like the one before. No graves, no ghosts. Just a woman no longer hunted, and a man who knew how to outlive sorrow. Spring broke in the high valley, slow and reluctant, with meltwater carving fresh paths down from the mountains and ice groaning its last beneath the pines. The land around the cabin thawed in patches, soft earth revealing buried roots, bones of deer, rusted cans. Elijah planted beans and potatoes with careful hands. Ingrid rebuilt the fence line, post by post, sleeves rolled to the elbow, her scarred hands indifferent to splinters. They did not speak often of what had passed, not because it pained them, though it did, but because it had finished what it came to do. The wound had closed, not without scar, but closed all the same. It was a quiet life. They traded with the town 12 miles east, cured hides, goat's milk, sometimes dried herbs Ingrid gathered from the woods. Elijah took up wood carving again. Ingrid wrote letters that she never mailed, in a tongue no one else around could read, folded carefully and buried in a tin box beneath a stone at the edge of the stream. Sometimes strangers passed through, Trappers, drifters, men riding west with nothing but bad teeth and tired eyes. They saw a man and a woman, neither young, neither old, both watchful in that way survivors are. The kind of people you didn't press for stories. Ingrid kept her blade sharp, but she no longer carried it every day. She no longer flinched at footfalls behind her or traced escape routes with her eyes when she entered a room. Something in her had set down its burden, like a wolf finally convinced the forest no longer burned. But the past still had long legs. One evening near the end of May, a rider came, dressed clean in gray wool, no gun, no spurs. He said he was a courier from Chicago, riding under the seal of the Ostergaard estate. He asked for Ingrid by name. She met him on the porch. Elijah stood beside her. The letter was real. It bore the crest of her mother's line, half forgotten, and an embassy seal from Denmark. The words were brief. Her father had died. The man who signed her away for 25,000 florins had finally gone to the ground. Her younger cousin had taken the family estate, but with no male heirs left, the old laws had been cracked open. Her name, long thought lost, had been quietly reinstated. They were offering her a title. Not as a duchess, as a sovereign. Come home, it read. You are not just the last of your name. You are the last with the right to rule it. Elijah read the letter twice, said nothing. Ingrid folded it slowly, sat for a long while on the porch, watching the light shift through the trees. She didn't answer right away. That night she walked to the ridge above the cabin alone. Elijah didn't follow. He knew she needed silence to hear herself think. From there she could see the valley spread out like a cradle, the low hum of spring insects, the stars creeping out one by one. And she thought not of Leopold, or her father, or the oath she'd broken in fire and blood. She thought of the girl she had been beneath the wagon, broken, pinned, one eye ruined, thinking she would die unseen. She thought of the woman who rose from that dirt, and the man who had carried her when her legs would not move. She came back at dawn, laid the letter in the fire, watched it burn. She never wrote back. They stayed through that summer and the next after that. Sometimes they traveled south to trade, sometimes east for supplies. But they always came back to the cabin, to the cold stream and the split-rail fence and the bones they had buried under pine needles and thyme. In town, people began to know her as Mrs. Vance. No one asked too closely. There was no wedding band, no church record, but they walked side by side and built a life together that needed no witness. She never bore children. But sometimes, in late autumn, when the leaves went rust-red and the evenings dropped cold, Elijah would find her near the hearth with a girl from the town, showing her how to sharpen a blade, how to mend her own coat, how to read a contract line by line. She taught survival the way some taught prayer. Years passed, the wood darkened, their hands stiffened. The world moved on, and the story of the girl promised to a king became another thing forgotten beneath the noise of empire and war. But in one cabin, high in the northern wilds, a man and a woman grew old without apology. And when Elijah Vance died, he did so with her hand in his. She buried him beneath the high pine, wrapped in the last of the wool from their first winter together. No stone, no name, only a carving on the tree above. He never looked away. And when the girl once called Ingrid Ostergaard died, decades later, the town buried her beside him. They asked what they should write on her marker. The man who carved it thought for a long time. And in the end, he wrote only what she had become. She survived, and made the world remember it.